Hello, friends. Welcome to Momentum Boost. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I'm grateful, and you're going to be grateful that you joined us today. So, if you want to ask the guest a question, all you do is type it into the chat box. That's what it's there for. So, today we're looking at another side of the Israeli army and uncovering the joys and the challenges of being a parent of soldiers today. We're going to get personal and intergenerationally to boot about what happens when a lone soldier becomes a dad whose own child becomes a soldier. So this is really more than just about being in the IDF or being a soldier. It actually speaks to the family dynamic for all of us. So joining us today is Joel Chasnoff. Now, he is a comedian and he's a former lone soldier. He's an American who immigrated to Israel and he joined the Israel Defense Forces. And he's the author of an amazing memoir called The 188th Crybaby Brigade, a skinny Jewish kid from Chicago fights Hezbollah. This should be good. Please welcome Joel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Adrienne.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. I can't wait to hear your story. I want to start with a question that's probably something that most mothers who are listening would be interested in.
Okay.
You were a lone soldier. You made that decision. What was your parents' reaction when you went to them and said, I'm going to Israel, I'm going to be a soldier by myself? And did their reaction to your decision have any impact or play into what you decided to do?
Well, I wish I could say they were wonderfully supportive and stood behind me, but the truth is they weren't. It's not that they were against me, but they had not raised their kid in America and sent him to college in order to join any military.
Right.
And their influence did impact my decision because I originally wanted to go after high school. And they convinced me to at least wait until after college, kind of thinking I would change my mind. Alas, I didn't. But, they supported me once I told them I was going, and they were, of course, behind me the whole way. But it wasn't what they were expecting. That's a big difference. Israeli parents, from the moment they have a child, I think they are aware that this is a step in that child's life eventually. Whereas American Jewish parents, it's often a surprise.
No kidding. Well, so they were able to convince you to do college. That's a start. I
Yeah.
guess what I want to know is what in your Jewish upbringing, one way or another, whether was it relevant, was it not relevant that made you make that decision? What was it that sort of lit that fire in you?
It was so many things, from a very young, I went to Solomon Schechter Day School in Skokie, Illinois, and I had these wonderful, wonderful Hebrew teachers, one in whom in particular I remember, her name is Ruti Halprin, and I'm still in touch with her today a little bit. And I remember that on Fridays, she would call us over one by one to her desk, and she would have a copy of the Israeli newspaper from that week, and she would hold our hand and we would point out words in the Israeli newspaper that we knew. And it was so influential to be able to see that the language I was learning in school and the letters I was copying down in my notebook, they actually connected to something bigger, that there was this mysterious country like Oz that maybe I would one day go to, and that I was a part of it. And so these experiences with Hebrew teachers through grade school, elementary school, and then in high school, we had exchange students stay in our basement, and I went to Israel with Camp Ramah. That was really the big influence, is going that summer when I was 17 years old with Camp Ramah, because you're 17 and these soldiers are 18. There's 1 year difference between you. And yet it's worlds of difference. They're these lions of Judah. They have Uzi machine guns and berets and forearm like bricks. And then there's me slathered in sunscreen. I'm wearing a fanny pack stuffed with lactose pills. I mean, the contrast was so stark, and I wanted to be them. I wanted to be that guy. And I really believe that any lone soldier who goes to the army goes for two reasons. One is Zionism, and the other is some sort of inner identity puzzle that they're trying to solve. And for me, I think part of it was that attraction to be the cool, strong, heroic Israeli soldier that I'd always heard about. And that summer when I was 17 was very influential for that reason.
Oh my goodness, that was furiously honest. I love it because I've often wondered whether that whole I'm going to be a man piece of it plays in. But then on the other hand, there are women who are lone soldiers as well.
For
So
sure.
they're not looking for it, they don't have the same motivation.
No, but I think it might be something else. I think I do a lot of programs here in Israel. I'm in Israel now, and I do programs for lone soldiers. And one theme that I hear a lot is I I wanted to give to something bigger. A lot of them say, I wish America had some sort of national service, not military, but just something that you could contribute to an idea bigger than yourself. And I think a lot of lone soldiers are very attracted to the notion that they want to do something against what they consider a very, I don't mean to offend anyone in the audience, but I think a lot of lone soldiers see a sort of self-centeredness to a lot of the typical American path, high school and get good grades and Princeton review so I can get into a good college and all about themselves. And I think they like the idea of giving to something bigger, and the Israeli army affords them a chance to do that.
Yeah, I would imagine you're right. So, I mean, as a segue from that, what kind of values and, sort of operating systems and benefits did you get for your character, for the way you move through the world as a result of being in the IDF? Like, what are the pluses that we can tell parents out there, if their children are interested in this, that was the birthplace for, other than,
Yeah, I mean, look, the army is hard. There were fun moments, but it is not overall a fun experience. And I think one of the great benefits is learning how to exist with every type of person. I think, one of the big jokes is that when you go to Camp Ramah or any other Jewish summer camp, they always send the cream of the crop Israelis, the best ones who were in the scouts, and they're beautiful, and you fall in love with them, and you think, wow, there's a whole country full with 8 million others just like this. And then you go to the army, and you meet people from the, as they call it here, the peripheria, the periphery, the not Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem, but the small towns you never heard of, and the moshavim. It's not everyone is like those gorgeous Israelis they sent to your summer camp, and you learn to deal with every swath of person. You learn how to stand up for yourself. You learn how to balance your own personal values with the idea of getting orders that you might not always believe in, and so you need to negotiate. When do I speak up? When do I go along? The growth that you get out of that experience, I really don't think you can get it anywhere else. Certainly not in university.
okay, so now you've got kids who are in the army. So
Yeah,
has that acceptance of authority translated itself to being respectful to you at home?
it's uh, it's very funny because these are kids who I have twins who are 19 and a half, and they both have very good jobs in the army. One is a chemical warfare instructor, and her job is to go around the country, basically educating infantry soldiers how to stay safe during a chemical attack. And it's very complicated science, and there's a huge responsibility that she has as well. And her twin sister works with combat engineers doing some heavy duty operations, and they're responsible literally for lives and for the country. And then when they come home, it takes a lot of effort to get them to move a dish from the table to the sink. Like, you would think this would be the easiest thing in the world, but that's one of the, you mentioned family dynamics in the beginning. I think that's one of the strange family dynamics is they come home and chances are they've been working harder than I have during the past 2 weeks. And so they just want to rest and be taken care of. And yet we as parents have this expectation. Come on, you're 19, fold the laundry, do the dishes, do the chores you used to have. It's a balancing act that we still, they're 6 months, a year into the army. We still haven't fully figured that out yet. But there is a line that's difficult to navigate.
Is there any relationship between their being drafted, their going because that's what you do, and your choice? Do you see any of the zeal that you felt, any of the desire to connect that you felt? Is it different when you have Sabras for children?
Yeah, so let me give some background. I came as a lone soldier when I was 23 after college. Then after my service, I moved back to the U.S. We had our 4 kids there. Only 4 years ago did we move back to Israel, and so my twins moved here when they were 15, I believe, 15 or 16. What would be their sophomore year of high school, second year of high school. So they got their draft notice during their first year of high school here. And you asked about zeal. If anything, I think their enthusiasm was stronger than mine because I had to go through it alone. I was very enthusiastic, but I wasn't going through it with peers. So there was always this question mark in my head. What do I do next? What's going to happen? The kids here, my kids, when they went through the experience, everyone was going through it at the same time. And so there was that sort of mass enthusiasm,
Sure.
which went into sharing information with each other. There's, the same way we have Princeton Review prep courses for the SAT in the United States, here they have what's called kosher kravi, which is combat fitness courses, where kids will, for a full year before the Army, take these combat fitness courses as a group to try to get in shape, to get into the good units. And I think that doing it together with your best friends, that adds a lot of zeal as well. It's a different type of zeal, but they were extremely enthusiastic about going in.
Okay, just for the sake of clarity, because a couple of people are asking on the chat, just define
Sure.
what it means to be a lone soldier.
Lone soldier. It's good to define that because we often forget. A lone soldier is actually a legal and technical term that the military uses to define certain soldiers. A lone soldier means you have neither parent living with you in the country. And the most common way for that to happen is the guy like me or others who come from America, Australia, England, move here. Neither of their parents are living in Israel. Just to give you some context, when I was in the Army in 1997, 98, there were maybe a couple hundred lone soldiers. It was unheard of. The term existed, but no one really knew what they were. Today, there are more than 6,000 lone soldiers in the Israeli Army. But what's interesting is that it's half and half. 3,000 are these soldiers who come from other countries voluntarily to join. But the other 3,000 are Sabra Israelis who are born and raised here, but they don't have relationships with their parents. A few of them, their parents are diplomats and maybe they live in Belgium or France, and so their parents aren't here. But the majority of those are Haredi, ultra-Orthodox soldiers who do not need to join the army. They're not obligated to. However, they choose to voluntarily, and their parents and communities are against it. And so once they decide to join the army, their parents cut them off. You're no longer my child. They don't have a relationship anymore. And they are now considered lone soldiers because they don't have a relationship with their families.
Me because I actually personally know many Haredi families in Israel where their children serve in the Haredi units, and they're really proud of them. So I'm sorry to hear that.
It does happen, but the other way happens as well.
Well, so. You know what? I'm sure it happens really around a lack of religiosity too. I mean, I also have girlfriends whose kids from Canada wanted to become lone soldiers, and the parents were appalled. Absolutely not. You can show your Judaism in another way other than joining into a violent, situation. So, so I guess my question is it different with your girls? Do you worry about their safety? And did your parents worry about your safety? Was there a real, I mean, listen, we're all worrying about safety these days. Let's face it, we're in there. But what was the most challenging experience you had as a lone soldier? Because your book is both serious and hysterically funny. And like, what the heck is funny about war? So maybe you can put that in perspective too.
For sure. So what's funny about war? I think the funniest things come out of very serious situations. Woody Allen said comedy is tragedy plus time. So anytime you have a tragic situation, eventually we will be able to laugh at it. And so much of the army is absurd. I mean, the notion, I often say, people ask me, what's it like in the Israeli army? And I say, well, imagine a bunch of Israelis running an army. That is the Israeli army. So imagine an army where everyone hates authority. I mean, how do you have an army where nobody respects authority? But Israelis can't stand to be told what to do by other people. And yet you have a whole military functioning that way. You have a whole army where people, the army is absurd because it's a very casual society. You call your commander, your officer, by his first name. In the American military, you go 20 years and you still call him sir. In Israel, he's Avi after 3 weeks. It's casual, but that leads to absurdity as well. So for me, the humor in my book, I feel, came from the absurdity of all the situations we were in. What could be more absurd than graduating high school and 4 weeks later, you are handed a rifle and put in charge of defending and protecting the lives of your fellow countrymen? That's an absurd situation, and a lot of humor comes out of it because as much as they are heroic lions of Judah, they're also 18-year-old kids and prone to all the things that 18-year-olds do and think. And we can't forget that they are human beings as well.
So when I think about lone soldiers, when I think about those young men and women who are serving there, especially at 18 and 19 years old, I ask myself, what can we do, we in the diaspora, Do they want letters? Do they want care packages? Can you send care packages? What would you have wanted? If anything could have come for you, what would you have wanted to ease the way for you?
I think the first thing lone soldiers today need is that their communities, and this is very serious, but that their communities truly look out for them ahead of time to make sure they are the right fit. Because
What does that mean?
uh, a
Understand.
lot of lone soldiers come over here. Not all of them, but many come here because they think it'll be adventure. They think it's going to be really cool. They met lone soldiers on their birthright trip, and or soldiers on their birthright trip, and they want to be one of them. But they're not really cut out to be in a military, and also not cut out to be in an Israeli military. You know, Israelis are very different from Canadians, Americans, Australians. Their mentality is different. And I think the best thing a lot of communities can do is just when someone's thinking about it, make sure that this person really knows why he or she wants to do it and that they're doing it for the right reasons and that they're the type of person who can get along in this kind of very high pressure group situation. The other thing is, once they are here, remind them that you appreciate it. One thing I hear a lot from lone soldiers is, I came with so much enthusiasm, but now 2 years into my service, I'm exhausted. I don't know why did I do it. I just want to get through the day. I want to get to the next Shabbat. They've lost sight of the bigger picture, the bigger mission, and that's natural. That happens to anyone. But what will remind them, what will bring it back, are those kind of the appreciation from the U.S. Whether it's emails, letters, if you know someone coming over visiting to bring a gift, just saying, "Hey, we are behind you. We do remember you. We value that you're here," because they do forget that.
Gee, I wonder when you said make sure they're the kind of person. I've also heard stories about people who you would least expect to excel in the IDF. Kids who were struggling in school, who couldn't find their place, and treated joining the army as their last resort for a little bit of respect from people around them. I will, at least I can do this.
Hmm.
And that it turned them around. It turned them around in so many ways. But I would also imagine that people who perhaps, struggle with maybe depression or some kind of mood disorders may also find themselves depressed in a situation like that. Are there services and places within the Army that deal specifically with the lone soldier just to check in on their mental well-being, or is that your commander's job?
The first person in charge of this is the commander, and now more and more they are aware of it. I'm sorry to say this, but there have been a number of suicides among lone soldiers in the past couple of years, and that's I think the Army is realizing that is as glorious as it is to promote the idea of soldiers coming over voluntarily and serving the Jewish state, that they really do have to screen better and make sure what you just said, that some people are seeing this as their last chance for a little bit of accomplishment, and it might not be the right thing for everyone. And so commanders now are they are undergoing more education, what to be on the lookout for, and also to realize just what the challenges are. No matter how healthy you are mentally, being a soldier is hard, and being a lone soldier is even harder, because the regular soldier in Israel can come home once every 2, 3 weeks, and mom will make his favorite meal or her favorite meal, and dad has the car ready, and the friends are there to support you. If you're a lone soldier, you're coming home, you're doing laundry, some grocery shopping, trying to get some phone conversations in with people back overseas. You don't have that support system knit into the system the way Israelis do, and that's a very big challenge as well.
Did you feel like the skinny Jewish kid from Chicago with the, nose spray and the Otrivin and the lactose pills in your bag? Did you feel like that after a
The first
while?
time I really felt like that was when we had our very first fitness session. They said, "Hey, we have a fitness session," and so we all showed up at the basketball courts, and most of the guys were wearing like T-shirts and sneakers from the Shook that cost like 8 shekels, and I had like University of Pennsylvania lacrosse shorts and Nike Airs, and I felt like the rich, spoiled American from the suburbs, and
Yeah,
there was
you
nothing I
were.
could do about it. I had to live like that for the next 3 weeks till I could go home. But
I'm sure you
that
could
was
have
that was
created.
one moment that definitely stood out as I'm a little I overdid it a little bit.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure you did. We're just gonna take a look at some of the questions because there's so many of them. I've never seen the
Sure.
chat like this. And some of them are asking if you're going to do some jokes. So you better think of one right now because
I did about 30 jokes already. You guys
I
didn't think
know, but
anything I said was funny? Nothing
they
is
were all
landing? I'm
funny.
kidding.
They were situational. They were relation oriented to what we were talking about. No, we want something that's some serious shtick in a minute. Okay, so somebody just said, "Oh, that's so funny. It's just endless." Is Joel going to tell jokes today? All right.
How
So,
much was this that they're all
uh,
complaining? It's
yeah,
free, right? Come on.
oh, it's probably a friend of yours who's trying to
Right.
like, drive you crazy. So somebody said our daughter was a lone soldier. She completed her service 2 years ago. Today, although it's not perfect, there's a lot of services. What was it like for you? Were there any services for you when you were there? And what was the thing that made you the most frightened, if anything at all,
The most frightened?
other than
Um,
anaphylactate?
yeah, right.
Around,
In terms of frightened, I'll start with that first. We went to Lebanon at the end of our service. Lebanon began in 1982. In June of 82, Israel went in. It was supposed to be a 6-week operation. It turned into an 18-year war of attrition. So when I was in the army in 1998, in the spring, we went into Lebanon. And that was extremely frightening for a few reasons. First, combat is frightening, but what is even more frightening about it is that Hezbollah, we quickly learned, was using tactics that we would never use. They would fire at us from schools, from fruit orchards, from people's backyards, which you're not allowed to do according to UN regulations. And they would do this knowing full well that we would not fire back. And I must say, I live in Israel, and I'm a realist, and my book is very realistic. It's pro-Israel, it's anti-Israel, it's everything. I'm honest. But one thing I must say is I really do find the IDF to be a moral army, and really respecting rules of war and going above and beyond in ways that other armies would not. And certainly in Lebanon, the most frightening thing was that you were fighting an enemy who had no regard for the agreed upon rules, and you knew would stop at nothing, and yet our hands were tied. So that was very frightening. In terms of services, back when I was in the army, I really didn't have many services. Lone soldiers, the term was recognized, but no one really knew who they were or why we came. Unfortunately, it took the death of a lone soldier to turn that around. This is Michael Levin, who I'm sure many people have heard about. Zichrono Livracha. He was killed in the summer of 2006 in Lebanon too. And the quick version of the story is his mother Harriet was afraid that there wouldn't be a minyan for his funeral. So they mentioned it on the news in Israel to a few people, if anyone could make it. And the morning of Michael's funeral, there was a traffic jam, and Harriet was afraid she wouldn't even be able to get to her son's grave for the funeral. But it turned out this traffic jam was for him. 10,000 Israelis showed up for his funeral, so he wouldn't, so that they could say Kaddish and he wouldn't be buried alone. And I must say, Israelis are a difficult people. They're challenging in many ways, but at the end of the day, there's no one like them. And I think sometimes it takes situations like that to show you the best of what Israelis are like. But it's situations like that one with Michael Levin. It shows you who Israelis are. And it finally put a face on the lone soldier. Now they could say, whoa, there are people like this who come from, he went to Camp Ramah. There are people who go to summer camp and grow up loving Israel enough to come and join the army. And ever since Michael's passing, people here do know what lone soldiers are. And the services and recognition is so much better. It's unfortunate that that's what was required, but they are recognized now finally.
I remember what you're talking about like it was yesterday.
It was 14. It was unbelievably 14 years ago.
It's very hard to believe, but I remember it so clearly. Did you find yourself changed? Was that why you ultimately had to go back to Israel? I mean, you went to America, you met your wife in America, I imagine. Mm-hmm. And then was there any discord around coming back, making Aliyah from the rest of your family after that?
Yeah. So we actually made it a little easier. We left New York. We were living in New Rochelle. We left New York in the summer of 2015. And we backpacked around the world for a year as a family. We just took everyone out of school and spent that year traveling around the world, riding buses and youth hostels, very rustic. But during that trip, that's when we decided to go to Israel. And I think it made it easier because we were really living nowhere for a year, that anywhere we chose to go would be home. The older two were resistant at first. They wanted to have prom and football games and all the things you see in High School Musical. But then I think within a month of being here, The thing that they said very often was, we find the friendships here a lot deeper, that they feel extremely close with their friends, and they were able to get closer faster. And they're very, they were very happy we moved. So yeah, there was resistance at first, but I think they adapted.
So somebody's just asked, how do the grandparents feel now about having their grandchildren in the IDF?
Well, sadly, their grandfather, who passed away, but he was extremely patriotic, and he grew up in Tel Aviv before Israel was a state, and fought in 4 wars, and did as much military reserve duty as possible. He would have been extremely proud to see them in the IDF, but alas, he passed away before we even moved to Israel. But their grandmother is extremely moved, and I think it's a big deal for her to see it come full circle like that. My parents are less enthused. They miss their grandchildren, but I think that's understandable.
Now, so do most of the lone soldiers come speaking Hebrew, or did you have to? I mean, listen, I went to day school education, and Hebrew doesn't guarantee that you're going to make it in the Army.
No, in my case, I loved Hebrew, and I studied it. And when I went to the Army, I'd say my Hebrew was very good. By the time I was a month in, it was fluent and even native speaker. I remember one night during basic training, I dreamed in Hebrew, and I knew that once I had dreamt in Hebrew, I'd turned a page, and it meant I'd reached a new level. Now, that said, there are lone soldiers. There was one in my platoon, Tim Bailey, who's a good friend of mine still. And he grew up Christian, but on his 18th birthday, his mother revealed to him that she had been Jewish before she became born again. She was Jewish when he was born, which meant that he is technically, according to halakha, Jewish. And as part of his identity crisis, he moved to Israel, joined the army, and he didn't know a word of Hebrew, not ima, abba, nothing. So they made him a tank driver, because to drive a tank, you need to know 6 words: kadima, achora, yamina, smola, sa'atzor, which is front, back, right, left, stop, go. And he was the best soldier in the platoon because he couldn't argue back with the commanders. I think the Israeli army is the only army where soldiers argue back with their officers. But Tim had no vocabulary, so he couldn't, and he was beloved for that reason. I will say, on a serious note, I don't think it's a good idea to join the army without Hebrew. It's literally dangerous, and it could be life-threatening. And the army does try to provide ulpan lessons for lone soldiers, but soldiers do come in with various levels, from the very high to barely any at all.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you, tell me the funniest thing that happened to you in the army. Your favorite funny story. Go ahead. You can exaggerate it if you want, Joel.
No need to exaggerate. I'm just wondering if we have children on the audience. I need to screen which stories I tell.
No politics. We don't want any political. We eventually focus on what unites us, not what divides us. So no bashing.
The worst thing you can do is put a comedian on the spot and say, "You're a comedian. Be funny. Tell a joke." I mean, one story I like to tell is how I fell in love with Israel on that first trip when I was 17. I think when you come to Israel when you're 17, we forget that this is a very hormonal age. Your hormones are raging. And so when you step off that El Al plane, what they want is that you'll fall in love with Masada and the Western Wall and the Golan Heights. But what you really do is you fall in love with Israelis. I mean, we can all admit this. We've been to Israel. We're all smitten with Israelis when they come. The women, they're all exotic and Mediterranean and tan and fit. And the men are these hunks with crew cuts and muscles and chiseled jaws. And it's so odd because they've got the same roots as we do, right? Yeah. Eastern Europe, Poland, Germany, except they look like supermodels and we look like Jews. Like, how did that happen? That's just not fair. So that's how I like to talk about falling in love with Israel. In terms of a funny experience during the army itself, I think it was, what comes to mind was, it's called Shavua Milchama, War Week, where we simulate war, and they march us out into the desert and we have to build our tents. And it's so typical Israeli army, you'd think they would teach us how to build a tent in the daylight so that we could put it up at night and know what we were doing, but they never did. We just marched out at 11 at night and had to build them in the dark, and everyone's shouting and yelling and bumping into each other like the Keystone Cops. Now, it was very comedic even at the time, just everyone running into each other and cursing and swearing, and there were no lights anywhere, and we're tripping all over each other. And I remember thinking, like, this is the Israeli army. This is the 6-day war. This is the raid on Entebbe right here. Because I think as Americans, we lose touch with the reality. These are teenagers, and this is, not everything's going to be perfect.
And Jewish teenagers putting together a tent sounds to me a bit oxymoronic.
Exactly. Well, there you go.
Joel, thank you. You know what, honestly, I have so enjoyed this conversation, and clearly so is the rest of the community watching, because the chat function was going like mad.
No, I hope
I'm
so.
really so grateful for your time, and the conversation was touching and hilarious all at the same time.
Thank you
And
so much.
we really hope you can be with us again in the future.
I would love to. I think it's wonderful what you're doing and a great way to connect with people and connect them to each other during this time.
Oh, good. I'm glad you feel that way, because that's what we're shooting for. Okay, everybody out there in Momentum Land, make sure you join me on Friday, November the 20th, because do you know the reggae and rhymes meet Jewish pride and rap songs? The spoken word artist, Ari Lesser, he is an incredible rapper. His raps have gone viral. I've had them sent to me by maybe 100,000 people over the years. So he's phenomenal. He does biblical beats, and he did this brand new ode to the Jewish women in his hip hop version of Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. His songs are inspiring, and they bring the heritage to life in brilliant ways. So you're going to want to dance along and do your moves and learn all the lyrics to these really good songs. So to register for any upcoming boosts, you just click the link or visit us at momentumunlimited.org. And please don't forget to respond to the poll coming up on your screens after our short video. So for me, Adrienne Gold Davis, and all of us at Momentum, please remember, as we learn and we grow together, that one of the highest forms of wisdom will always be kindness.